Prices don't just move by magic. Behind every single transaction, every little shift in the market, there's this hidden machinery at work. It's kind of this unglamorous but incredibly powerful scaffolding of rules and trust and paperwork that pretty much shapes our entire economy. So let's dive in and start uncovering these invisible rules that really determine value. Just think about it for a second. We're totally surrounded by pieces of paper, documents, contracts, all that cash in our wallets. What is it that makes one piece of paper a binding agreement worth millions of dollars, while another one is just, paper? It kind of feels like alchemy, but I promise you, it's not. The real secret is a framework of invisible rules that all of us, without really thinking about it, have agreed to follow. So in this explainer, we're going to open up that toolkit. We're going to show you the exact mechanisms that turn these simple agreements into incredibly powerful economic forces.
Okay, let's start with the absolute fundamentals. The whole market system really just rests on three main pillars. You've got standards that create order, trust that gives everything legitimacy, and networks that pass information around. A standard is basically the starting point for, everything. It's a simple, agreed-upon rule. Is this kilogram actually a kilogram? Is this dollar bill the real deal? The standard is that official yardstick that separates what's acceptable from what isn't. It is the most basic and honestly the most powerful rule of them all.
So to really decode any economic event, an analyst has to get their hands on the hard details, the specific names, the dates, the measures. Think of it like a detective story, right? You might know in theory how a crime was committed, but if you don't have the specific clues, you can't actually solve the case. And we'll be pointing out where some of those clues are missing as we go along.
Okay, so if standards are the rules of the game, how do those rules get turned into actual, tangible value? Well, it happens through a few core mechanisms that are constantly at play in pretty much every market out there.
So here you can see the very first mechanism in action. Definitions literally create value. If a coin meets the official standard for, say, weight and purity, the market accepts it at its full price. But if it fails, even by a tiny bit, it gets discounted, or maybe even rejected outright. And that gap, that space between accepted and rejected, that's where fortunes are made and lost. And it all boils down to a simple definition.
But who actually decides if something meets the standard? Well, that's the job of the trust bearers. And we're not just talking about big institutions like banks or courts. We're talking about the practical people on the ground. The inspectors verifying the quality of goods, the clerks stamping documents, the brokers who match up buyers and sellers. These are the human gears in the machine of trust, and without them, the whole system would just grind to a halt. And here's the thing, these trust bearers, they don't operate in a vacuum. They are all connected in a massive network. A new rule from a single clerk, or even just a rumor about a grain shortage in one port, it sends ripples through the entire system. Information travels through official channels, back channels, you name it, connecting everyone and influencing prices everywhere, sometimes in an instant. And finally, and this one is absolutely crucial, you have to look at the incentives. It really doesn't matter what the rules are supposed to do. What matters is what they actually reward. So if the rules accidentally make it more profitable to create more paperwork than to, say, produce actual goods, well, guess what you're going to get a whole lot more of? Paperwork.
So what happens when these rules get challenged? When a core standard comes under pressure? Well, markets almost always react in this predictable four-act drama. Understanding this sequence is really the key to seeing what might happen next.
It all starts with a trigger. It could be a war, a new piece of technology, or government decree. Then comes adaptation, as clever people, find workarounds. And that leads to stress, where the old way of doing things is openly challenged. And finally, you get a resolution. Either the old standard is reinforced or a completely new one takes its place, changing the rules of the game for everybody.
And make no mistake about it, any change in the rules creates very clear winners and losers. The winners are usually the folks who see the change coming and adapt quickly. The losers? Well, they're often the ones locked into the old system, who only feel the change later on through higher prices or maybe not having access to something anymore.
But here's where the real pro-level analysis comes in. A good analyst always asks this question. Did the rule change actually cause the outcome we're seeing? Or were prices already moving that way and the new policy was just a reaction? Telling the difference between causation and correlation is one of the hardest and most important parts of understanding economic history.
So why does all this history even matter? Why should we care? Because these frameworks, they aren't just relics of the past. They are the quiet, invisible bones of our modern economy. and their legacy is literally all around us. I love this quote because it is just so true. A standard, once it's established, it gets embedded in everything. It lives on in our habits, in our legal forms, and even in the software code that runs today's financial markets. These rules have very, very long lives. They stick around. This is a perfect example of what I mean. The function stays the same even as the technology completely changes. A Roman wax seal, a medieval guild mark, and a modern digital certificate, they are all doing the exact same job, verifying trust according to a standard. The tools change, but that invisible rule just keeps on going.
So, here's the crucial point. You now have a simple but really powerful toolkit to decode the economic world around you. Anytime you see a market moving or something strange happening, just ask yourself 3 questions. 1. What's the standard being used here? 2. Who are the validators, the trust bearers? And 3. How is information moving through the network?
And that's really the big takeaway. From the way your credit score is calculated to the standards that govern the organic food you buy, these rules are absolutely everywhere. So the final question is really for you. What invisible rules, what standards, and what trust bearers are